Welcome to The Poetry Joint, a podcast about poets, poems, and poetics. My name, Stephen Donahue. I have a scant knowledge of poetry, and that is the starting point for this podcast, to see what I can learn.
There's a light on in the attic. I can see it from the outside, and I know you're on the inside, looking out.
Exploring good poetry, bad poetry, sonnets, couplets, ballads, rhyme, no rhyme, grand verse, silly verse, concrete poetry, liquid poetry, words with meaning, words without meaning, old poets, young poets, radical poets, ancient poets, contemporary poets, confessional poets.
Angel-headed hipsters, burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night.
The Poetry Joint. Hang out. See where we go. This episode of The Poetry Joint is visiting some recently released poetry. Okotoks publisher Frontenac House released their annual Spring Poetry Collection for 2024. They celebrated that with an event on April 19th. 3 poets read selections from their books. It was a full house, an expectant crowd full of anticipation. First up was Callista Markotich, a poet from Ontario. Her collection of poems is titled Wrap in a Big White Towel. This is her first book of poetry. She began writing poetry later in life, following the death of her sister and after attending a writing retreat. She found the power of words to harness emotion, drew her in, and she started writing poetry.
Please welcome tonight one of our very first authors, Callista Markotich.
I have to introduce you one time to my brother John, just once, and you'll never have to meet him again. Brother John. He came home in mother's arms when I was 6. Transparent eyelids trembling in a study of our faces. His fists the size of rose hips jerked with fierce and spastic punches that broke the reverence of our gaze. We had to laugh. We offered him our favorite Bubba pillows and pre-gunned teddy bears. At 3, his shapely little head was bent intent upon his sandbox city, plying crumbly roads with tiny cars and trucks, wreaking floods and avalanches in cold and capable destruction. We banned him from our hospital for dolls. In short, at 6, his charm was wearing off. We didn't find his childish genius cute. We're miffed that he, spared endless scales and practices, became Svengali on piano, mastered it fast and made it bare its soul. And then laid claim to our dad's pride, but wouldn't play the music that Dad longed to hear. Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, no. Sometimes he'd sit down with a flourish, plink out Yankee Doodle, pound the Camptown races doodah day, all crass and honky-tonk. Oh, this is fun. Dad died, and John came home, laid open the piano, and emptied Dad's so-loved music on the keys and played and played. We had to stop him finally, assure him Dad could hear, said, wherever he is, he's loving this. And John blinked like a child, believing. And Mum laid her hand upon his head, said, thank you, John, as if she meant it.
That was Callista Markotich with a poem about her brother John. Next poet on the evening was Tom Wayman. Tom, a resident of the Slocan Valley in British Columbia. Tom has published some 20 collections of poetry, 3 books of short fiction, and has taught at a variety of educational institutions, including the University of Calgary from 2002 to 2010. Check out his website for more details of his interests and accomplishments. His most recent book of poetry is How Can You Live Here? Tom Wayman.
And I also would like to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Beautiful, beautiful night. So my book, How Can You Live Here, comes out of 30 plus years living in a mountain valley in southeastern British Columbia. It's in the southern Selkirk Mountains, about 40 miles west of Nelson, BC, and I've been based there. The challenge in the book is to try to describe the natural world, which is of course not the human world, despite what the ecologists say. It's different. It's not the same. There's both mystery. There's that promise of threat, and a lot of beauty and things that give us pleasure. First poem I'm going to read is kind of the anthem for the book, called How Can You Live? How can you live here? No one asked, with only the moon for entertainment and the weather for advice. Where the public thoroughfare is the swans and ducks on the winter river, or eagles and ravens coasting thermals over spring's wooded ridges. I am the deer, bedded down in the warm bracken for a short July night, or settled into a dip in the earth below the boughs of a fir during dark hours of autumn rain or snow squall. For music, I have the wind high in birch and hemlock. If I want to hear a story, that's what the fire and the stove is for. Neighbors? The seasons, who one by one drop around to check on me, see how I'm doing here.
Tom ended his reading that night with a poem from another author, that of poet William Stafford, a poem called A Notice, a Bly Prescription.
Poetry Month, so I want to read a poem by the Oregon poet William Stafford. Generally speaking, once schools have gotten through with people, they hate, loathe, and despise poetry, and really wish to never hear of it again. But all that means is that poetry needs as much help as it can get. And so this is William Stafford praising actually a book of poems by the American poet Robert Bly, someone who is important to me. But I think what Stafford says about poetry applies to all excellent poems. So this is William Stafford. These pages are good for you. They enhance your life. A few of them every day, mixed in with ordinary reading, will keep up your appetite, provide incentive, and maintain hope. One page provides 20% of the minimum daily requirement of wonder and mystery. Along with religion, they will sustain you even in conditions of extreme stress. For chronic spiritual anemia, you should consult your family poet. No government has established the minimum daily requirement of honesty and trust, but no society has ever lasted without at least trace elements of these essentials, richly present in these pages. Thank you.
The final poet on this night with his inaugural book, the release titled Wakefield, was Calgary's 6th Poet Laureate Wakefield Brewster, Again, his many accomplishments and more listed on his website.
We have a tradition at Frontenac House, and that is to always put the hometown reader in the last spot. So our hometown reader is Wakefield Brewster.
You know, back in the day when slamming was how I really got known, you know, you get known as a slam poet. And then you get, you know, those little boxes. Calgary dubbed me a social poet. And I'm going to hold on to that moniker until I die. Thank you for believing that I'm not just telling my story, but attempting to tell ours. So in light of that, here is a community that often doesn't get to tell its story. And darkness and light and healing, as Micheline had already mentioned, were pretty big parts of my life, including impending homelessness due to being an alcoholic, being an addict, and having a lot going on upstairs. I wrote this poem for the Calgary Homeless Foundation because of my unique perspective of being so close to this vulnerable community, always skimming that surface, save for the grace of anyone pulling me out of it, and then enjoying this wonderful life being in an acute state of recovery. This conversation is for these vulnerable communities whose voices are almost never heard personally or listened to truly. The people who are trying to do their best to pull the communities out of these problems, and then all the experts who are basically us. It is a conversation that I have put into poetry, and I ask you all, if you wish, at any time, close your eyes during this poem and see if indeed I paint some pictures in your minds with these words I write. This is about the housing, houseless, and homeless crisis that we are having here in Calgary, and the poem is titled, "There's No Place Like It." There's no place like it. Not a single one's the same. But this is not Monopoly, and life is not a game. It's complex and compounded, heaped with hurt and guilt and shame. It's never anybody's fault, and no one is to blame. But it is somebody's problem, and somebody isn't me. NIMBY, it's a problem for those and for them and for others, in housing and projects, in ghettos and gutters. It's a problem for people with problems, presenting akin to pollution. Say people with all the opinions who haven't a single solution. They're lacking a true understanding. The sources they haven't inspected. I'm certain they switched their opinions for knowing just whom this affected. There's the adolescent Johnny who had told his dad, "I'm Jane." And never did she step inside her halls of school again. Also, Alice from the office, who repeatedly was shown domestic terrorism first begins inside the home. With multiple employment for the food and heat and rent. Paid for 2 of 3, and all the money has been spent. Like those people whose behaviors we dismiss as poorest choices. Submitting to what we can't hear, relentless inner voices. Like an auto wreck, a ruptured neck, a battered bloody brain. Optioning for opiates to quell the cruelest pain. From those predisposed genetics, often first to take the fall. Before most humans drown themselves consuming alcohol. And then those with money, those with means, when leisure got extensive, financed to foreclosure when their substance got expensive. I mean, every human in the life you do and do not know, and every soul no longer here we only knew as dough. There's no place like it, not a single one's the same. But this is not Monopoly, and life is not a game. It's something like a circus that's as hard as hell to tame. It's full of tears, and this ain't cheers. Nobody knows your name. So, with the grace of distancing and social disconnection, pious persons postulate to claim the lone correction. So confused and self-infused in every which direction, don't realize reality is only their perception. Slanted news from slanted views assumed as information, cleaning our communities with social segregation. Here is where the evidence and arrogance shall meet, where and what is happening on every city street. City? First mention city, then watch folks frown. No way in hell am I going downtown. Strewn on the sidewalks, dumped by the door, curled up on the alcove concrete floor. Public in the parking lot, shopping carts abound. Private in the parking lot, hidden underground. Back streets, side roads, narrowest of lanes, slumped at the Saddle Dome, home of the flames. On the public transit, shelter from the storm. See it in the stations, finding where it's warm. Graphic like graffiti painted up against the wall. There, right across from City Hall. Storefronts, boulevards, alleyways, entrance. People wanna see it go away with a vengeance. Squalor in the streets must desist and decease. Wait a minute, can't we just call the police? There's no place like it. Not a single one's the same. But this is not Monopoly, and life is not a game. Cardboard now constructed, crafting structures to sustain. But windows, doors, and locks don't work without a proper frame. Thus, if not here, and if not there, then where is this to go? I blame social services, the hell if I should know. 1935 are on the streets on any night. What a mass and multitude to simply shift to slight. Squatting centers, tenements of tents are springing up. I don't want those people around my kids I'm bringing up. Hunkered down in hospitals consumed by complications. Populated prisons make for warm accommodations. Out of sight means out of mind, I'm sure your bias vouches. You don't see the surplus of our city's surfing couches. Still at risk is life like this, susceptible and prone. For when you have a roof, it doesn't mean you have a home. Symptomatic, systematic, suffering and strife. Death is looking now to be the best sleep of your life. Food and home and shelter often found in the basic three, from the sidewalks to the door locks, granting human dignity. There's no place like it. Not a single one's the same. But this is not Monopoly, and life is not a game. It's complex and compounded, piled with prejudice and pain. It's always everybody's fault, and everyone's to blame. Thank you.
That was just a sampling of the evening. The poets treated the audience to much more of their creative wordplay, their poetry, and some of that may pop up in future episodes. Certainly their books, Wake World, How Can You Live Here, and Wrap in a Big White Towel, contain more word magic for the reader. I caught up with Tom Wayman after his book tour when he was back for a brief sojourn at his Mountain Valley acreage. Here is some of that conversation. First question is one you said you could talk for 40 minutes on, so you don't have to talk for 40 minutes on it, but why poetry?
I touch on it in a number of essays, is that When I started writing, which was a long time ago in the 60s, poetry was a much more important art form than it's seen to be now. For example, a new book of poems by Earl Burney or Irving Layton or Dorothy Livesey, or actually any number of people, was way more of an event. They would be on television, they would be interviewed. Poetry was considered, one of the cultural mainstays of a country. And then in the activism that went on, it was accepted that poetry could contribute, so that whether it was a feminist magazine or a Canadian independence newspaper or anti-Vietnam War publication, almost always there was poems or a poem. Even at rallies and meetings, sometimes there was poems were. So it wasn't as odd a thing to want to write poetry as then, as it might seem now. All that said, for me personally, I grew up in a household where my dad, although he was a pulp mill chemist and an engineer, industrial plant design, that sort of thing, he was a great lover of poetry, could recite poetry. And then, as I've written about, he and my mother were part of the left in Toronto, which included a lot of poets like Earl Burney. My mother had worked as a social worker, and so poets like Dorothy Livesey or Miriam Waddington were social workers. My parents knew a number of people that would be considered now sort of modernist poets. When I was growing up, the house was filled with, new books by those kinds of people, and also newcomers like Leonard Cohen, for example, one of the younger guys. So poetry seemed more a natural art form, more of an important art form for me, and so it was a natural step. If I had to argue for it now, when I was teaching him, we were always trying to defend creative writing. It has to do with a democracy only works if people can articulate what they need, what they want, articulate injustices that they see and hopes for the future. And I think having to set down in words, whether it's poetry or any art form, your thoughts, your feelings, calms them down, calms those feelings and emotions down, and your hopes and dreams. It stills them in a way that both you and other people can look at them more objectively. And I think that's central. If people can't articulate, what they want and also the reasons for that, if they can't make an argument, then democracy starts to be less and less effective. And people are more willing to accept either the dictates of bureaucrats or extremist ideas that aren't going to do them any good in the long run, but might seem like a way of venting, a way of striking back at what they feel is pushing them around. I think the ability to write is central to a functioning democracy. And one of those areas of writing is poetry, because poetry traditionally is more succinct than prose, and at a time when people's attention spans are shrinking rapidly, there ought to be a big boom in poetry, and it may yet happen. A good friend, colleague, fellow writer John Lent in the Okanagan, he says he likens poetry to jazz, which goes in and out of fashion. And okay, we're at a time now when poetry's not much in fashion, but John argues that pendulum will swing. We're kind of due or even overdue for a sense again of poetry's contribution to our cultural, imaginative, political life. What do you think?
Well, what do you think? Obviously, Tom puts a lot of thought into his craft. There are several books by Earl Burney and Irving Layton at the Calgary Public Library, a few books by Dorothy Livesey. If you want to get familiar with those references, here's another poem from How Can You Live Here?
Word Bear. Driving John Lent through the night after his reading, from the highway I had crossed the river to the winding back road toward my acreage where John was staying. But as we passed dim shapes of forest, interrupted by lines of fence posts and openings into people's driveways, the blackness to my left suddenly took the form of bear. My foot stabbed at the brake, and the animal, the size of a big dog, lumbered close past my headlights to disappear between trees across the road. Bears are frequently seen along the valley floor in early fall like this, searching for apples, pears, plums, or anything that yields easy calories. John and I had been speaking, off and on, all day about ambition, how when our words take shape, we want the best for them, yet they have to forage through literary neighborhoods and landscapes they have little choice about inhabiting. We had agreed that luck is significant in determining if the words flourish, the odds their environment offers sustenance, and whether those who happen to observe them intend good or ill or indifference. The stride of a bear, a motion well suited to carry its weight at high speed when necessary, is impressive. Even the deliberate pacing this one employed to pad around the front of my truck. The bear's muscles, legs, and behavior patterns are an achievement no matter if an entire village, or only John and I, or nobody witnesses them. I hope my words out on the earth can adequately prepare for the coming cold, and, should they experience more springtimes, are able to remain curious about all they encounter. If the words fail to thrive, I wish them to be functional, effective, for as long as they endure, wherever they journey, through the day or darkness.
That track provided by Jenny from Snowdog Audio in Bragg Creek. Snowdog Audio and Frontenac House are working together to produce audio versions of Frontenac releases. More information to be found on their websites in the future, I would imagine. One more track from Tom Wayman before the poetry joint disappears for another month.
Time Traveler 1. Fog blurs the line of empty birches between my house and the road, and beyond the trees out every window obscures the present world. Is such mist a manifestation of the past, the years, the decades before now hiding what exists? Or is fog a representative of the future, altering, simplifying, obliterating how we view today? The cloud in the upper branches of the firs and cedars across the lawn separates to tufts, dissolves into tatters, then densifies once more. Yet if I walk closer to this opaqueness, it recedes, revealing clarity with each step of my approach. Thus I conclude, mist is the future, cloaking where we proceed to until we accomplish each moment of that journey. 2. Time's arrow, according to cosmologists, points only one way, unlike any other known force or equation in our universe. Thus the past accompanies us as we advance, is towed behind us in the one permissible direction, borne along at precisely the speed of time. The future, the mist, in contrast, is a visitor here, a time traveler, able to move implausibly against the current. Time's course ensures that when people in the present change their future, only the future is transformed. Whereas if the past could be reshaped by tourists, both past and present would be altered. And yet the threads and walls of mist are cautious not to impact any other time, withdrawing as we near them. A small rain begins, and on the steep rise of mountain, fog materializes, then thins, dispersing into wet air. The envoy has returned home. The appearance of the future among us, though, no matter how brief, is a reminder that past and present are not all that comprise this world, that both these states of time are propelled toward an indistinctness which the voyage abolishes, toward a substance the voyage creates.